Hey you, and welcome. In this video, we will work with React components. So let's dive right into it. In the previous video, we had created a Create React App project, and we deleted a few files and deleted a reference for it. So the server should still be good to go. In my terminal, I do have npm start still running. Let me just close it and show that is working. npm start. That should start the server for me. It opens the project in the browser. I'll close this out and go back to my Firefox, refresh, but it does look messy. I do want to create my own project. And in order to do that, we have to learn about components because React doesn't just serve a giant HTML file. It will break everything into tiny little components that then gives you a lot of control over what you want to render at certain times. All right, so let's see what that looks like. I'll go back to my VS Code. In the SRC, the first component that is already created for us is the app.tsx. Remember that in index.tsx, we are importing app /app, and that is being rendered using JSX on line number 11. So that's our first component. Usually you would want to come up with a folder structure that makes sense and then create components inside that. So in this case, I'll start with a very basic folder structure by adding another folder under SRC called components. There are many schools of thoughts on this. Some people don't like just the components folder. They would say maybe components folder should be broken up into atomic design where tiny little components are atoms, bigger components are molecules, and bigger components than that would be organisms, and bigger components than that would be templates. But our project is not going to be that big, so we're okay with just having one components folder and it will just have our TSX files as is. We're not going to create too much of a structure here. All right, so I'll right click on the components folder and click new file option, and let's create our first component. Let's call it hero.tsx. So that will be our hero banner that we want to work with. All right, perfect. So I'm starting with a fresh empty file. I'll take away my file explorer. Let's write our first React component. In order to do that, I will import React capital R from React library. That's always the default to work with. Now remember, you don't have to memorize any of this, just so you know. I could easily go to app.tsx, copy the whole thing, paste that in here, take away the return, and start from here. This is just all I need to get a component going. But I wanted to break it down for you. That's why I'm writing it manually. Usually I would just copy paste those things. So don't memorize it. Just know that components in React are functions. Okay, I'll delete all of this. All right, next thing I would do is start a function and call this one hero. Name, it won't really matter because we'll be doing a default export. Name would matter when we don't do a default export. I will explain to you what I mean in a bit. So I'll do a return null semicolon, and then at the bottom export default, and then pass it the component that I want to return, in this case hero. Perfect. That's our React component created. Of course it returns null. That means it's not rendering anything, but it is a component however. So I'll open my file explorer, go to app.tsx, and in the app.tsx, let me hide my file explorer here. In the app.tsx, I will delete line number 2, delete everything from the return statement, and import, import, let's give it a name, hero from, and I'll use relative path here, so /, that's how you start a relative path. And when you do that, automatically VS Code picks up that this is the path relative to where you are right now, which is in the SRC folder, and we can now go to different folders. In this case, it tells me components folder is available. Do you want to go there or do you want to use any other files? In this case, components folder is the one I want to use. So I'll select that, / again. Now it tells me there is a hero file. Do you want to use that? Yes. Perfect. So I'll get that hero name, and I will, in the return, use JSX, which is just like a HTML tag, starting with a >, sign, put the component name, and this is going to be a self-closing tag. So I'll do / sign, and that's me rendering the function. All right. So if I go to Firefox, let me see where it is. Okay. It is empty, which is reasonable because we haven't rendered anything. So let's go to the VS Code and let's make some changes. Okay. So in the hero component, Let's render something out. I'll do p tag, or actually this is a heading. Let's start with h1. h1, this is a hero. Save. And when I do that, if I go back to my Firefox, you can see it's rendering out. So that's one component right there. Next, let's create another component and see how those components work. And this time, I'll make a little change to how I export and import stuff. So let's right click on components folder, new file, and let's name this paragraph, some kind of paragraph. tsx.tsx because we're working with the TypeScript project, and tsx, x at the end would be for JSX element. All right, so import React from React. I will hide my file explorer, and here I will export. So remember in the previous one, I'll split my screen so we can see both the components. Remember in the hero.tsx, we have function and then export at the bottom. Here I'm going to start with just export const and call it paragraph equals to like so, and then return null. Great. I will take away the split screen. We don't need that anymore, and go back to paragraph.tsx. And what I've done here is I'm exporting paragraph as is. I'm not exporting it as a default. So when somebody tries to import it, they won't have access to paragraph right away. They have to destructure that in their code. So I'll show you what I mean in a bit. Let me just write a paragraph tag here and work with this is a paragraph. Also notice that the function that I wrote is starting with const rather than a function, and it's an anonymous function, or not anonymous anymore. I did assign it to a const. However, it is a arrow function being used. So parentheses equals to greater than sign, curlies, and then return. I could do just I could do this as well, where I don't need curlies and just do p tag directly, which would also work. Reason for that is because if you don't provide curlies, whatever you provide after the greater than sign for the arrow functions, that would be the return. In this case, JSX is the return. So that's a shorthand way of doing it. I would just keep it simple so I can read it better, and I would just work with that. So I will explicitly say return this and use the curlies, so later on I can add more code to it. Go ahead and save that. And notice in Firefox it's not going to render. Why is that? Is because we haven't rendered that out in app.tsx. So remember, whenever you create a new component, doesn't mean it's going to be used right away. You do have to render it somewhere. And in this case, app.tsx is where we need to render it. So how do we import this? We do from that /components paragraph, close that out. And remember, this is not a default export. That means if I did paragraph, it won't really give me anything. It's going to complain about things. And the reason for that is because I haven't done export default. So we have to destructure using curly braces after the import. And then I could do control space here, and that would give me IntelliSense, or I can start typing and it will start completing for me. Is that you mean paragraph constant from this file, which I do. Copy that. And then I will render it. Now, notice what happens if I try to render. I cannot do this. That's not gonna work. You cannot have two returns in a function. It's not gonna work JavaScript wise. Then how do we render multiple? Well, another way to do it would be just do parentheses and try to render it out like this, but it will still complain. Reason for that is because JSX needs at least one root element, and then you can write as many child element as you want, or children element. So one root element, I would say take div and make these two part of that div, and then it will stop complaining. So that div becomes our one root element, and hero and paragraph become two children of that div. If I go back to Firefox, I can see that the hero and the paragraph are both rendering. Great. So that's how components are made in React, and we can break down our code to almost tiny little controls on the website and make big websites using those components built together. All right. I'll see you all in the next video.